You know, most people think the worst job in the galaxy is waste reclamation on a mining station. Those people have clearly never been assigned to babysit 6 telepathic alien cubs who could probably disembowel you before you finished saying, "Good morning." But that's exactly where Security Chief Caleb Morrison found himself on a Tuesday that started like any other day in Paradise. If Paradise happened to be a sterile research facility on a planet so remote that the nearest civilization was a 3-week hyperspace jump away, the Galactic Preservation Institute on Kepler 442b was humanity's crown jewel of xenobiological research, a gleaming monument to scientific progress and interspecies understanding. At least, that's what the recruitment brochures said. In reality, it was a collection of prefabricated modules connected by endless corridors that smelled faintly of disinfectant and recycled air, populated by scientists who thought ethical considerations was something you discussed at faculty mixers. Cal had been security chief for exactly 93 days, which was 89 days longer than his predecessor, who'd requested an emergency transfer after what the incident reports diplomatically called acute psychological stress syndrome. The previous guy before that had lasted 6 days. The one before him, 48 hours. There was a betting pool among the staff about when Cal would crack, and the smart money was on any day now. But Cal wasn't your typical security chief. At 42, he was a weathered veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, with scars that told stories he preferred not to share, and a service record that was mostly classified. He'd worked with military dogs, bomb-sniffing cats, and even a few of those unsettling psychic ferrets they used for reconnaissance. He understood that intelligence came in many forms, and that trust was something you earned, not demanded. Which brought him to the Juvenile Apex Predator Containment Unit, or, as everyone else called it, the Nightmare Ward. The cubs were Vorthak, 6 juveniles of a species that had nearly reduced 3 human colonies to space dust before cooler heads prevailed and hammered out a ceasefire that was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Adult Vorthak stood nearly 3 meters tall, possessed telepathic abilities that could drive humans insane, and had reflexes that made cheetahs look like they were moving through molasses. The cubs were smaller versions of this biological nightmare, roughly the size of large dogs, with crystalline fur that shifted colors based on their emotional state, and 6 limbs that ended in retractable claws capable of cutting through titanium. Oh, and they were smarter than most of the research staff, but nobody wanted to admit that. "Morrison, you're late for the morning briefing," came the crisp voice of Lieutenant Kayla Torres as Cal approached the containment unit. Torres was everything Cal wasn't. Young, ambitious, and possessed of the kind of rigid adherence to protocol that suggested she'd never met a regulation she didn't want to marry and have little regulation babies with. "Traffic was murder," Cal replied dryly, gesturing at the empty corridor. "What's the situation?" "Same as always. The subjects refuse to cooperate with Dr. Amanda's psychological assessments. They won't eat unless you're present, and they've been making those sounds again." The sounds in question were a low harmonic humming that seemed to resonate in your bones. The research team called it vocalizations of unknown purpose, but Cal had a different theory. He thought they were singing. "Maybe they're bored," Cal suggested, earning a look from Torres that could have flash-frozen nitrogen. "Ever think of that? How would you feel if you were stuck in a box all day with people poking at you?" "They're dangerous xenobiological specimens, not pets," Torres replied, her hand unconsciously moving to her sidearm. "Doctor, Amanda has made it very clear that maintaining clinical distance is essential for both safety and research integrity." Cal nodded absently and keyed in his access code. The containment unit's door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing what looked like a cross between a luxury hotel suite and a maximum security prison. The walls were transparent aluminum, the floors were heated to match the Cub's homeworld temperature, and every surface was monitored by enough sensors to track a gnat's breathing patterns. And there, arranged in what could only be described as a formation, were the 6 cubs. The moment Cal entered, their crystalline fur shifted from the dull gray of depression to a brilliant cascade of blues and greens, colors that Dr. Felix Ramos had tentatively identified as indicating happiness and excitement. The humming stopped, replaced by a sound that was definitely not in any xenobiological textbook: purring. "Well, hello there, troublemakers," Cal said, his gruff exterior melting away like ice cream in a plasma furnace. "Miss me?" The largest cub, the one Cal had privately named Spark, approached the barrier with fluid grace. His fur was cycling through patterns of gold and silver, and his large, multifaceted eyes fixed on Cal with an intensity that was both unnerving and oddly comforting. Behind him, the others arranged themselves in what Cal had learned was their version of a family group. Echo hanging back but watching everything, Bolt practically vibrating with contained energy, Mist barely visible in the shadows, Frost calculating and calm, and Little Ember bouncing on all 6 limbs like a caffeinated kangaroo. Subjects show increased activity in response to Morrison's presence. Came the voice of Dr. Amanda Holbrook through the intercom. The facility director was watching from the observation deck, her gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it probably caused her chronic headaches. "Please maintain proper protocols, Chief Morrison." Cal ignored her and approached the barrier. "How are we doing today, gang? Somebody giving you trouble?" Spark placed one clawed hand against the barrier, and Cal mirrored the gesture on his side. It was a ritual they'd developed over the past few months, and one that sent the research staff into fits of excited note-taking and dire warnings about inappropriate subject bonding. "The subjects have been refusing their nutritional supplements," Dr. Felix called from his workstation, his voice carrying that particular strain that came from dealing with Amanda's increasingly demanding research schedule. Felix was a good man trapped in a bad situation. He'd joined the project thinking he'd be helping preserve an endangered species, not turning them into lab rats. "They haven't eaten in 18 hours. 18 hours! Cal frowned. "That's not like them." "The feeding schedule is precisely calibrated," Amanda's voice crackled through the intercom. "If they're hungry, they'll eat. We cannot allow emotional manipulation to compromise our research protocols." Cal bit back his first 3 responses, all of which would have gotten him court-martialed and probably launched into the nearest star. Instead, he turned to Spark. "What's wrong, buddy? Food not up to your standards?" Spark tilted his head, a gesture that was purely human and completely adorable, and then did something that made every human in the room freeze. He spoke. "Cal, friend," the cub said, his voice a mixture of harmonic tones that shouldn't have been able to form human words, but somehow did. "Others, not friend." The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a photon drop. Even Amanda stopped her constant note-taking. "Did that thing just—" Torres started. "Yeah," Cal said quietly. "He did." Echo stepped forward next, her silver fur shimmering with patterns that looked almost like writing. "Others want— hurt. You protect?" And that's when Cal realized that everything he thought he knew about this situation was probably wrong. The cubs weren't just intelligent. They understood exactly what was happening to them. They knew they were prisoners, not patients. They knew the research was a sham. and they knew that Cal was the only thing standing between them and something much worse. "Holy Mother of—" Dr. Felix breathed, his tablet sliding from his nerveless fingers. "Fascinating," Amanda said, though her tone suggested she found it about as fascinating as discovering a spider in her coffee. "Note the time, 0932 hours. Subjects demonstrate previously unrecorded linguistic capabilities. Morrison, step away from the containment unit." "Like hell," Cal said. "That's an order, Chief." Cal turned to face the observation deck, and his expression was the kind that had once made enemy soldiers reconsider their life choices. "With respect, Doctor, my orders are to ensure the security and well-being of everything in this facility. That includes these cubs." "The subjects," Amanda corrected, icily. "The children," Cal shot back. Behind him, the cubs had arranged themselves in what was unmistakably a protective formation around Spark and Echo. Their fur was shifting through colors that Felix's instruments had never recorded before. Deep purples and crimsons that seemed to pulse with their heartbeats. "Fascinating," Felix whispered, completely forgetting protocol. "Look at those chromatic patterns. It's almost like they're communicating," Cal finished. He'd suspected it for weeks. The color changes weren't just emotional responses. They were a visual language as complex as any human writing system. Ember, the smallest of the cubs, approached the barrier and looked up at Cal with eyes that held far too much understanding for something that was supposed to be a simple alien animal. "Cal stay?" she asked, her tiny voice somehow carrying the weight of everything unsaid. And that's when Cal made the decision that would change everything. He wasn't just looking at 6 alien cubs in a research facility. He was looking at 6 children who had been torn from their families, shipped across the galaxy, and were now being prepped for God knows what by people who saw them as things rather than beings. "Yeah, little one," he said softly, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Cal stays." From the observation deck, Amanda's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Security team to Containment Unit C. Morrison. You're relieved of duty. Effective immediately." The cub's fur went black. Every single one of them, simultaneously. Even Felix knew enough about Vorthak biology to know that meant one thing: rage. "You might want to reconsider that order, Doctor," Cal said, not taking his eyes off the cubs. Because in that moment, he realized something that would have terrified anyone with half a brain. These weren't just intelligent alien children. They were intelligent alien children who loved him. And love, as any soldier worth his rations could tell you, was the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The security team's footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Cal found himself wondering if the smart money in that betting pool was about to pay out. But as he looked at 6 pairs of alien eyes watching him with absolute trust, he discovered he didn't much care about the odds. Some things were worth the risk. 3 months had passed since the incident that the official reports called Communication Breakthrough Event Alpha, and which Cal privately thought of as the day everything went sideways. The security team had backed down, mostly because the cubs had made it very clear through a display of synchronized hissing and claw extending that anyone who tried to remove Cal would be dealing with 6 very upset alien children who could probably turn a grown man into confetti before he cleared his holster. Amanda had been forced to compromise, which was about as pleasant for her as swallowing broken glass. Cal remained as head of security for the containment unit, but under enhanced oversight protocols that basically meant Kayla watched his every move like a hawk with trust issues. But the cubs didn't care about politics or protocols. They cared about the fact that their human had stayed, and they showed their appreciation in ways that would have melted the heart of anyone who still possessed one. "Cal! Cal!" Watch! Ember bounced excitedly near the barrier, her crystalline fur cycling through every color in the spectrum. She'd been working on something for days, and her siblings had arranged themselves in a semicircle behind her like the world's most dangerous audience. "I'm watching, little spark," Cal said, settling into his usual spot on the floor outside their enclosure. It drove the research staff crazy that he sat on the ground instead of using the provided observation chairs, but the cubs seemed to prefer when he was at their eye level. Ember took a deep breath and began to, well, Cal wasn't sure what to call it. She was moving through a series of positions that were part dance, part martial arts demonstration, and part interpretive performance art. Her siblings' fur shifted in harmony with her movements, creating a light show that was absolutely mesmerizing. "She's telling a story," Felix breathed from his workstation. Over the past few months, the nervous xenobiologist had become Cal's unofficial ally in the ongoing battle to treat the cubs like the intelligent beings they obviously were. "Look at the chromatic patterns. They're synchronized across all subjects. It's like they're creating a shared narrative." "What's the story about?" Cal asked, though he suspected he already knew. Echo stepped forward, her silver fur pulsing with gentle waves of blue and green. "Home," she said simply. Before bad time." The cubs had been gradually learning more human words, though Cal suspected they understood far more than they let on. They were clever enough to play dumb when Amanda or her research team were watching, but when it was just Cal and Felix, they'd engage in increasingly complex conversations. "Tell me about home," Cal said softly. What followed was the most heartbreaking thing Cal had ever witnessed. Using their color language, broken human words, and an elaborate series of gestures, the cubs told him about their world, a place of crystal forests and floating cities, where their people lived in harmony with the planet's unique electromagnetic fields. They told him about their families, their games, their dreams, and they told him about the day the sky caught fire. "Big ships," Bolt said, his usual hyperactive energy subdued to an almost whisper. "Human ships. Say they help. Say they save us." Frost, the most analytical of the group, approached the barrier with his characteristic calculating gaze. "Not save. Take. Parents fight. Parents gone." Cal felt something cold settle in his stomach. According to the official reports, the cubs had been rescued from a planet devastated by civil war. Their parents had supposedly been killed in the fighting, and the cubs had been the only survivors. But the way Frost said "gone" suggested something else entirely. The rescue mission was a complete success. Amanda's voice suddenly echoed through the intercom. She'd been listening, of course. She was always listening. The subjects were recovered from a hostile environment and brought here for their own protection. Spark's fur went deep red, a color that Felix's charts indicated meant anger mixed with something that roughly translated to lying liar who lies. "Dr. Amanda," Cal said carefully, "maybe we could discuss this later." "There's nothing to discuss, Chief Morrison. The subjects are experiencing false memories, likely a trauma response to their ordeal. It's quite common in juveniles of highly intelligent species." Echo made a sound that was definitely not in any xenobiological textbook, something between a snort and a laugh. "Human think we stupid," she said to her siblings, her fur flickering with patterns that Cal was starting to recognize as the Vorthak equivalent of eye-rolling. "We not stupid," Mist added quietly from the shadows. She rarely spoke, but when she did, everyone listened. "We remember everything." That night, after the day shift had ended and the facility settled into its nocturnal rhythm, Cal found himself doing something that would have gotten him court-martialed if anyone had caught him. He was having a private conversation with 6 alien cubs about the real reason they were here. "Felix showed me the classified files," Cal said quietly, checking over his shoulder to make sure they were alone. "The ones Amanda didn't think he had clearance for." Spark tilted his head. "What files say?" Cal hesitated. "How do you tell 6 children that they're the last of their kind? That their parents weren't killed in some civil war, but were eliminated because they posed a threat to human expansion? That they themselves were being studied not for preservation, but for weaponization?" "They say your people are very special," Cal said finally. "Too special, maybe." Echo's fur went pale silver, the color Felix had identified as deep sadness. "No more Vorthak," she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know," Cal lied, because sometimes lying to children was the kindest thing you could do. "But I promise you this, as long as I'm here, nothing's going to happen to you. Okay?" Ember approached the barrier and pressed both her small hands against it. "Promise?" "Promise." What Cal didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that at that exact moment, Amanda was in her office 3 levels up, finalizing the paperwork for his transfer. What he also didn't know was that the Cubs' telepathic abilities were far more advanced than anyone suspected, and that they'd been listening to every electronic communication in the facility since their arrival. They knew about the transfer order. They knew about the real nature of the research. They knew about the military contractors who were already salivating over the potential applications of telepathic soldiers who could hunt in perfect coordination. But most importantly, they knew that Cal didn't know any of this yet. "Cal, good human," Frost said, his analytical mind already working through possibilities and probabilities. "Other humans, not good." "Not all humans are bad," Cal protested. "Felix is good. Some of the maintenance crew treat you decently." "Felix scared," Bolt pointed out, which was frustratingly accurate. "Scared humans do what mean humans say." Spark moved closer to the barrier, his golden eyes fixed on Cal's face. "Cal not scared?" Cal considered the question seriously. Was he scared? Of course he was. These cubs could probably take him apart without breaking stride. Their adult relatives had nearly wiped out entire colonies. He was sitting next to 6 living weapons who happened to have the emotional maturity of kindergarteners. But fear wasn't the strongest emotion he felt when he looked at them. "Yeah, I'm scared," he admitted. "But not of you. I'm scared for you." The cubs exchanged a series of rapid color flashes that Cal couldn't follow. It was like watching a conversation conducted entirely in Christmas lights, and he had the distinct impression that important decisions were being made. "We trust Cal," Echo said finally, speaking for the group. "Cal trust us?" It was a loaded question, and they all knew it. Trust worked both ways, and the cubs were asking for something that went far beyond his job description. "Yeah," Cal said without hesitation. "I trust you." Ember's fur exploded into brilliant patterns of joy, and she began what could only be described as a happy dance. The others joined in, creating a light show that was probably visible from orbit. From somewhere in the facility, an alarm began to sound. Not an emergency alarm, just the standard alert that indicated unusual biological activity in one of the containment units. Within minutes, Felix would come running with his instruments, Kayla would arrive with her suspicions, and Amanda would descend from her ivory tower with her clipboards and her cold, calculating questions. But for just a moment, Cal sat in the glow of 6 alien children who had chosen to trust him with their lives, and he made a promise to himself that he'd spend the rest of his life trying to keep. He was going to find a way to get them home, even if it killed him. "Incoming," he warned softly as footsteps echoed down the corridor. The cubs immediately shifted back to their harmless alien pets routine, their fur fading to neutral colors and their postures becoming docile and unthreatening. Felix burst through the door first, tablet in hand and panic in his eyes. The chromatic readings went off the charts. What happened? Are they okay? Just excited to see their favorite security guard, Cal said innocently. Nothing unusual. Behind Felix, Kayla appeared with her hand resting on her weapon, and her suspicious nature dialed up to 11. The subjects were displaying coordinated behavior patterns, she said. That's not normal. Define normal, Cal suggested. Because last I checked, being happy to see a friend was pretty standard behavior for most intelligent species. They're not pets, Morrison, Kayla snapped. They're dangerous. Cal, friend, Spark interrupted, his voice carefully modulated to sound as young and innocent as possible. Cal, nice. Others, scary. It was a masterful performance, and Cal had to admire the cubs' tactical thinking. Play up the cute factor, make the humans underestimate you, and always give them what they expect to see. But as Cal watched Spark's carefully innocent expression, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one being managed. These cubs were playing a game with rules he didn't understand, and he was starting to suspect that they were much better at it than any human realized. The question was, what did they really want? And was Cal prepared for the answer? Over the following weeks, the cubs' English improved at a rate that should have set off every alarm bell in the facility. They went from basic words to complex sentences to what could only be described as philosophical discussions about the nature of captivity, freedom, and the moral obligations of sentient beings. If humans keep animals in zoos to protect them, Frost asked during one of their evening conversations, who protects animals from humans? Questions like that were exactly why Cal had started bringing a flask to work. The cubs also began demonstrating abilities that weren't in any of the research files. They could sense emotions through the facility's walls, predict staff schedules with uncanny accuracy, and seem to know things about the facility's operations that they shouldn't have been able to access. How did you know Felix would be late today? Cal asked Mist, who had mentioned the xenobiologist's delayed arrival before anyone else knew about it. Mist's pale fur shimmered with what Cal had learned meant embarrassment. Feel his worry thoughts through walls. He fight with mate about job. Mate think job bad for Felix' soul. Cal blinked. You can read minds? Not read, Echo corrected. Feel. Emotions make ripples, like stone in water. And those ripples go through walls? Ripples go through everything, Spark said matter-of-factly. Why humans not feel ripples? Cal didn't have an answer for that, but it explained a lot, like how the cubs always seemed to know his mood before he walked into the room, like how they'd learned to speak English so quickly. They were probably absorbing emotional context along with the words, like how they always knew when Amanda was coming before her footsteps could be heard in the corridor. They weren't just telepathic. They were emotional empaths with the ability to sense the feelings of every human in the facility, which meant they knew exactly how each person really felt about them. Cal, Ember said one evening, her usual cheerfulness subdued. Why Amanda human hate us? Cal sighed. How do you explain prejudice to a child? How do you describe fear-based hatred to beings who could literally feel the emotions behind it? She doesn't hate you, he said, though it felt like a lie. She's just afraid. Afraid of what? Bolt asked, his energetic nature making him bounce from foot to foot. We small, we trapped, we no hurt anyone. She's afraid of what you might become, Cal said honestly. Your people and my people. We didn't get along very well before you came here. War, Frost said simply. Humans afraid we become like parents. Something like that. Spark approached the barrier, his golden eyes serious. Cal afraid too? Cal met his gaze steadily. I'm afraid I might fail you, that I might not be strong enough to protect you when it really matters. The cub's fur shifted to warm gold, the color of affection and trust. Cal, strongest human we know, he said, stronger than fear. If only that were true, Cal thought, because every day he could feel the walls closing in around them. Amanda's research was becoming more invasive, her questions more pointed. Kayla's security protocols were tightening like a noose, and the classified communications he'd been intercepting suggested that their time was running out faster than he'd hoped. The cubs sensed his growing anxiety, and their response was to become even more protective of him. They'd started positioning themselves between Cal and the door whenever Kayla entered the room. They'd begun making warning sounds when Amanda approached the observation deck. They were trying to protect their protector, and it broke Cal's heart even as it filled him with pride. But what none of them knew, what Cal couldn't have suspected, was that the cubs weren't just planning to protect him. They were planning to save themselves, and they'd been planning it since the day they arrived. The axe fell on a Wednesday morning because apparently the universe had a sense of irony and knew that Cal had always hated Wednesdays. He was in the middle of his morning routine, checking the Cubs' overnight reports, reviewing security footage, and pretending not to notice that Ember had somehow managed to rearrange her sleeping area into what looked suspiciously like a scale model of the facility's ventilation system, when Amanda's voice crackled through his comm unit. "Chief Morrison, report to my office immediately." The Cub's fur went gray across the board, the color of impending doom. They'd sensed the emotional shift in the facility before Cal had even received the message, which should have been his first clue that this wasn't going to be a friendly chat about improved cafeteria food. "Be right back," Cal told them, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. "Cal, no go," Spark said urgently, pressing against the barrier. "Bad feeling. Very bad feeling." "I have to," Cal replied. "It's okay. I'll be back." But as he walked down the corridor toward Amanda's office, he could hear the Cubs behind him making sounds he'd never heard before. Low, keening wails that seemed to echo from somewhere deep in their chests. It was the sound of grief, and it chilled him to the bone. Amanda's office was a testament to sterile efficiency. White walls, regulation furniture, and exactly 0 personal touches that might suggest she was anything more than a biological computer programmed to run a research facility. She didn't look up when Cal entered, just continued typing on her terminal with the mechanical precision of someone who'd never met a regulation she couldn't weaponize. "Chief Morrison," she said without preamble, "effective immediately. You're being transferred to Mining Station Omega-9 in the Tau Ceti system." Cal had been expecting bad news, but this was like expecting a paper cut and getting your arm amputated. "On whose authority?" "Mine, as facility director, backed by Admiral Janet at Sector Command." Amanda finally looked up, and her expression was about as warm as the vacuum of space. "Your inappropriate attachment to the subjects has compromised research integrity and poses a security risk." "Security risk?" Cal laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. "The Cubs haven't shown a single sign of aggression since they've been here. If anything, they're more cooperative now." "Exactly the problem." Amanda stood, smoothing down her lab coat like armor. "The subjects have bonded with you to an unhealthy degree. They're becoming dependent, which interferes with our ability to study their natural behaviors and responses." Cal's training kicked in, the part of his brain that had kept him alive through 3 wars and more firefights than he cared to count. He started cataloging details. Amanda's slightly elevated heart rate, the way her fingers drummed against her desk, the fact that she couldn't quite meet his eyes when she said, "natural behaviors." "What exactly are you studying them for?" he asked quietly. "That's classified above your clearance level." "My clearance level is alpha red, Amanda. There aren't many things classified above that." For just a moment, her mask slipped. Cal saw something in her eyes that looked almost like guilt before it was quickly replaced by cold professionalism. The subjects represent a unique opportunity to understand alien psychology and capabilities. The knowledge we gain here could prevent future conflicts. Or start them, Cal said. "Your transport leaves in 6 hours," Amanda continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "I suggest you use the time to pack." Cal turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "The Cubs aren't going to take this well." "The subjects will adapt. They're more resilient than you think." As Cal walked back toward the containment unit, he could already hear the sound of his world ending. It wasn't explosions or alarms. It was silence. The Cubs had stopped their usual chatter, their playful sounds, even their breathing seemed muted. When he entered their area, he found them arranged in a perfect circle, their fur completely black except for their eyes, which had taken on an eerie silver glow. They were doing something with their telepathic abilities. He could feel it like pressure building behind his skull. "Guys," he started, but Spark held up one clawed hand. "We know," the Cub said simply. "We felt Amanda Humandicide. We felt your sadness. We felt everything." Echo stepped forward, her silver fur barely visible against the black. "Cal must go?" "Yeah, little one. I have to go." What happened next was something that would haunt Cal for the rest of his life. The Cubs didn't cry or rage or throw tantrums like human children might. Instead, they simply stopped. They stopped moving, stopped eating, stopped acknowledging the existence of anyone who wasn't Cal. When Felix tried to offer them food, they turned away. When Kayla attempted to run security checks, they became as responsive as furniture. "This is becoming a problem," Amanda announced during the emergency staff meeting that evening. "The subjects' refusal to eat is threatening their health and our research timeline." "Maybe we should delay Morrison's transfer," Felix suggested desperately. "Just until we can establish alternative protocols." "Absolutely not." Amanda's voice cut through the suggestion like a plasma torch. "We cannot allow the subjects to manipulate our operations through emotional blackmail." Cal, who was supposed to be packing but was instead watching the Cubs through the security monitors, felt his heart break a little more. They were huddled together in the center of their enclosure, their fur so black it seemed to absorb light. They looked like they were mourning, which he realized they were. But there was something else in their posture, something in the way they'd positioned themselves that nagged at Cal's tactical instincts. It looked almost like they were planning. "Bobby," he called to the maintenance tech who was passing by. "How long can the Cubs go without eating?" Bobby shrugged. "Doc Ramos says maybe 5 days before it becomes dangerous. But they've never gone more than 12 hours before." 5 days. Cal's transport would take him 8 days to reach Omega-9, assuming standard hyperspace routing. By the time he could even send a message back to the facility, it might already be too late, unless the Cubs weren't just waiting to die. Cal pulled up the facility schematics on his personal tablet, cross-referencing them with the Cubs' behavior patterns over the past few months. Ember's art projects that looked suspiciously like architectural diagrams, Bolt's hyperactive exploration of every inch of their enclosure, Frost's constant questions about human technology and security systems. Mist's uncanny ability to predict staff movements. They hadn't just been bonding with him. They'd been learning, studying, planning. "You magnificent little monsters," Cal whispered, a smile spreading across his face for the first time in hours. "You've been playing the long game all along." His comm unit buzzed with a priority message. "Report to Transport Bay 3. Departure in 2 hours." Cal looked at the monitor showing 6 small figures huddled in the darkness, and made a decision that would either save them all or get him executed for treason. He wasn't going to Omega-9, at least not right away, because if the Cubs were planning what he thought they were planning, they were going to need all the help they could get. And despite what Amanda thought about inappropriate attachments, Cal had made a promise to 6 children who'd already lost everything once. He wasn't about to let them lose it again. The only question now was whether their plan, whatever it was, would work before Amanda's research moved into whatever sinister next phase she had planned. Something told him they were all about to find out. Cal's departure lasted exactly 18 minutes, long enough to reach the transport bay, disable the ship's tracking system, and circle back through the maintenance tunnels that Bobby had helpfully mentioned during casual conversation. Sometimes being paranoid and overly prepared for the worst-case scenario actually paid off. He was crawling through ventilation shaft C-12 when the facility's alarm system went absolutely berserk. "Code Black, Code Black, containment breach in Unit C." The automated announcement echoed through every speaker in the facility, followed immediately by Amanda's voice, pitched about 3 octaves higher than her usual Ice Queen tone. "All security personnel to Containment Unit C immediately." Cal allowed himself a grim smile as he dropped down into the corridor 2 levels below the Cubs unit. "That's my girls and boys," he muttered. When he reached the containment area, he found what could only be described as organized chaos. The transparent aluminum barrier that had held the Cubs for months was intact, but the Cubs themselves were nowhere to be seen. In their place was Felix, standing in the middle of their enclosure, with his mouth hanging open and his tablet clutched against his chest like a security blanket. "Where are they?" Amanda demanded, her professional composure cracking like a dam under pressure. I don't know," Felix stammered. "The barrier never opened. There's no breach, no damage, nothing. They just vanished." Kayla was checking her instruments with the frantic energy of someone whose career was circling the drain. "Impossible. The sensors show no exit activity. Nothing can pass through that barrier without triggering every alarm in the facility." Cal stepped into the room, and every head turned toward him. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong place," he suggested. "Morrison," Amanda's voice cracked like a whip. "You're supposed to be on transport to—" "Yeah, about that," Cal interrupted. "Funny thing about those Cubs you think are so primitive. They're not actually in their enclosure." "Obviously," Kayla snapped. "The question is, where?" "They're in the walls." Everyone stared at him. Amanda's face went through a fascinating series of expressions before settling on homicidal rage. "Impossible," she said. "The ventilation systems are monitored. The structural spaces are too small." "For humans," Cal agreed. "But Vorthak Cubs can compress their bodies to about 60% of their normal size, and their telepathic abilities let them coordinate movement through the facility's infrastructure without triggering motion sensors." As if summoned by his words, a soft humming began to emanate from the walls themselves. It was the Cubs' song, but amplified and harmonized in ways that made the entire facility seem to vibrate in sympathy. "How long have you known?" Amanda asked, her voice deadly quiet. "About 30 seconds longer than you," Cal admitted. but I suspected they were planning something when they started their hunger strike. Vorthak don't give up easily. They adapt. The humming grew louder, and suddenly every communication panel in the facility lit up simultaneously. Screens that normally displayed facility status began showing something else entirely. Star charts, navigation data, and communication frequencies that definitely weren't in any human database. They're not trying to escape the facility, Felix breathed, his scientific mind finally putting the pieces together. They're trying to call home. Home to what? Kayla demanded. Their species is extinct. That's when Spark's voice echoed through every speaker in the facility, clear and calm, and absolutely not the voice of a primitive alien child. Home to family. Family we never lost. Family that let us come here to learn about humans. The silence that followed was deafening. Cal felt the bottom drop out of his world as the implications hit him. You've been spies this whole time? Echo's voice joined Spark's, filled with what sounded suspiciously like affection. Not spies, students. We come to learn if humans could be friends or must always be enemies. And? Cal asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Most humans. Mist's soft voice carried a weight of sadness. Most humans see us as things, as weapons, as problems to solve. But Cal different, Ember added, her young voice bright with joy. Cal see us as children, as family. The facility's main communication array suddenly burst to life, displaying an incoming transmission from coordinates that shouldn't have contained anything but empty space. The image that appeared on the screens made everyone in the room take an involuntary step backward. It was an adult Vorthak, easily 3 meters tall, with crystalline fur that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When it spoke, its voice was like music made of starlight and thunder. Greetings, humans! We are Commander Stellaris of the Vorthak Collective. We believe you have been caring for our children. Amanda looked like she was about to faint. Kayla's hand was halfway to her weapon before she realized how spectacularly useless it would be. Felix was frantically taking notes, like the universe's most dedicated stenographer. Your children, Cal said, stepping forward, have been extraordinary. They've taught us more about courage and intelligence than any of our textbooks ever could. The adult Vorthak's multifaceted eyes fixed on Cal through the screen. And you are the one called Cal? That's me. Our children speak of you often. They say you are family. Cal felt his throat tighten. They're family to me, too. Then perhaps, Commander Stellaris said, it is time for family reunions. The walls around the containment unit began to shimmer, and 6 small forms materialized as if they'd been made of light and shadow. The cubs stood in their familiar formation, but their fur was no longer the colors of captivity. It blazed with patterns of gold and silver and deep space blue. We go home now, Spark said to Cal. You come with us? Amanda found her voice at exactly the wrong moment. Absolutely not. Those subjects are vital to our research. They cannot be... Spark turned to look at her, and for the first time since Cal had known him, the cub's expression was that of his species' apex predator heritage. We not subjects, he said quietly. We children, we family, we free. And, Echo added with a sweetness that somehow made the threat even more terrifying, we not alone anymore. Through the viewports, shapes began to emerge from what had appeared to be empty space. Sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around them, moving with the fluid grace of living things rather than machines. The choice is yours, Cal friend, Ember said, offering him her small clawed hand. Stay with humans who see us as things, or come with family who sees you as brother. Cal looked around the room at his fellow humans. Amanda was calculating escape routes. Kayla was reaching for her comm unit to call for backup that would never arrive in time. Felix was staring at the cubs with something that might have been wonder. Then he looked at 6 alien children who had trusted him when no one else would, who had chosen to see the best in humanity despite every reason to do otherwise, and who were offering him something he'd never expected to find among the stars: a real home. "Well," Cal said, taking Ember's hand and feeling the warm pulse of her alien heartbeat through her palm, "I always wondered what retirement would look like." As the Vorthak ships moved into position around the facility, and as 6 small aliens led their chosen human toward a future that neither species had imagined possible, Amanda finally understood the most important lesson the cubs had been trying to teach them all along. Love doesn't recognize species barriers, political boundaries, or research protocols. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a weapon or a warship or a telepathic apex predator. Sometimes it's just a child who trusts you to do the right thing. The facility's communication logs would later show that Commander Stellaris had transmitted one final message before the Vorthak fleet vanished back into the cosmic dark. "Thank you for caring for our most precious gifts. Perhaps there is hope for friendship between our peoples after all." Cal never looked back as the facility grew smaller in the viewport. He was too busy learning to speak Vorthak and discovering that alien lullabies were surprisingly effective at making gruff ex-soldiers cry happy tears. Some bridges, once built, can never be burned.